Welcome back to the Grief Mentor podcast with Teresa Davis. Today, we are going to talk about suicide and the effects it leaves behind for the survivors. My guest today is Wade Thaxton. Wade is without a doubt a survivor. He has survived the death of 5 family members by suicide, including his brother and his father. Wade declares he is indeed a survivor and suicide will not be in his kids' heritage. Wade's beautiful wife of 14 years is Clarissa, whom I've met and I adore. They have 2 amazing children. Eleanor is 9. She was adopted at birth due to God's timing and some fertility issues. And then Wesley, their son, who is 6. Wade considers both his children miracles and gifts from God. He's a regional director at Rehab Medical. He loves the outdoors and takes every opportunity to enjoy that with his family. Wade is passionate for people, and he is grateful that God continues to repurpose his pain to make a difference in other people's lives. Wade does life business coaching in his spare time, as well as invest in real estate. He gives God all the glory and credits his mother at giving him the passion to be productive every day. We are going to hear Wade's story today, how he survived, and what gives him the strength to continue to live his life in spite of his losses. Welcome, Wade, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Teresa. I appreciate it. Since our meeting and Grief Share a couple of years ago, I've just admired you as a person, just as a spirit, as a brave mama. For Andrew and an amazing wife for Tony. I remember the strength about you in the midst of, the loss of Andrew. And it reminded me a lot of my mom. And I just so admire that. My mom was such a special lady to me. I'm a mama's boy. So it's just, I owned that a long time ago and I'm okay with it. But it's hard to be a mama's boy when mama's not here anymore. So thanks for having me.
That means more than I can convey to you, Wade. I know how much you miss your mom. And in fact, that I'm glad you did that. I was getting ready to introduce how we met you. Wade was our facilitator. We're going to talk a little bit about Grief Share later. It's a 13-week grief group. Video driven and then breakout sessions. But that's how Tony and I met Wade. He was our facilitator, and that was 2.5 years ago. And the impact that he had on our life is why he is here today, because he has so much to offer. And I want your voice to be heard, Wade. So tell us, I know, Wade, your life was touched early on, actually before you were even born, by suicide. Can you tell us about your story?
Yeah. So my dad grew up in a tough home. His dad, my grandfather, was an alcoholic and an abusive alcoholic. So I don't know how that plays into this whole story, because if you look at the 5 people that have committed suicide, they're all on my dad's side of the family, starting with his father. If you go down the line in a timely order, it was his father when my dad was 19. The thing about that story is my dad never told my mom that. He said that his dad died in a factory accident. It wasn't until, I don't know how old I was, maybe in my teens, that my grandma, my dad's mom, conveyed to my mom, no, it wasn't that. He hooked a pipe up to his tailpipe in his car, and while it was in the garage, and circled it back into the main compartment of a car through the window, and then ran the car until he died from carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's kind of where this maybe goes back further. I don't know, but that's where it started. I don't know if you want me to keep going through the
keep going and just tell us, because there's more to the story.
Yeah, no doubt. So I don't know how many years between my grandfather, but the next person that committed suicide in my family was my brother, September 11th of 2002. So this year, marks 20 years in September that my brother took his life. And I say it in a multitude of ways. I say committed suicide, took his life, passed away. There's not a right way for me to say it, other than, that these loved ones have made a choice to end what I believe is a temporary pain, but they've made a permanent choice to do that, and took permanent actions. So it's just, I don't know. I just feel I'm comfortable with using a multitude of ways. There's no right way to say, oh, they committed suicide or they took their own life or however it is. It is. So my brother did that September 11, 2002. And 9 weeks and 1 day after that, my dad's sister, my aunt, took her life with some pills. That was a very sad, showing and viewing and eulogy, because not many people came. But I think my aunt, she was at my brother's showing and viewing and all that. And I think she saw the outpouring of love on my parents and my family with the community. And I think she thought she was going to get the same thing. And it's just so sad that she didn't get that. So I don't know. She had some mental health issues, and she had tried to take her life before that at different times. My mom told me later. So I just don't understand, why she did it, other than I think she thought she was going to get the same reaction, and it wasn't anywhere near that. So after my aunt did it, I guess you fast forward, I don't know how many years, my dad took his life on June 4th of 2014. Is that right? I think 2014. It was about a year after my mom had lost her battle to cancer. Mom lost her battle on June 30th of the year before that. So we're in the month of mom's anniversary coming up, and my dad had just struggled with grief. He was a part of Grief Share, the whole time I was. So you would have thought that if anyone knows and understands how to process grief well, he would. But the key component was my mom helped him process emotions throughout, their whole married life. So I really, anytime you lose a loved one through suicide, and unless they left an extensive note, you're left to try to put the puzzle pieces together as best you can. And so we had to figure, and you get some clues from people from here and there, but at the end of the day, you still don't really know exactly why. So I've just come to peace with some of the stories that I believe are why. Like my brother had dealt with addiction and struggled through that addiction. And we learned through our general practitioner doctor that Kyle had actually gone and seen him, several months leading up to that, and was trying to get himself clean. So he was doing the right thing. He was just doing it all by himself. And maybe that was a pride issue or something. But there was some other circumstances that happened, and I think things spiraled out of control for him. And I think he made this, sudden decision to just be done with all of it. And the fact that it was on the anniversary of September 11th attacks, and if you watched any amount of TV that day, the only thing that was on was the anniversary. And it was we needed to commemorate that, but I remember watching, so it was just really sad. The content that was on TV. So I don't know if that played a part of, again, you're trying to put the puzzle pieces together about why. So same thing with my dad. I was trying to put the puzzle pieces together about why would you do that to us? I remember yelling at him because I found him. I came home from, we had sold our house in Clarksville, and we moved up there with dad in the house that he and mom had built out in Lanesville. Clarissa and I and Eleanor, and Clarissa's pregnant with Wesley. So we moved in with dad because we were in between houses. I think we moved in February in the middle of a snowstorm, moved up there. Nothing ever seems easy anymore. It's always like there's some sort of challenge in there somewhere. So we'd been there with dad for about 4 months, and was talking to him about trying to buy the house. And I knew he was just struggling with being in that big house without mom, without, his wife of, I don't know, 40 plus years. So that day I came home from a business trip. I was out in St. Louis and came home on a Thursday in June. It was a nice warm day. And he had come back the morning before, I think, or that morning, early morning, from just a trip down to see some friends in Florida. And so Clarissa and Eleanor had seen my dad that morning. I think I even had breakfast with him or something like that. And then I came home about 5 or something, and I said, well, Clarissa had gone out for groceries or something. She'd been running some errands, been out for a while. And I was like, hey, where's Dad? And she goes, I haven't seen him since we've been home. It's been a couple hours. And so I said, well, let's go outside. So they went to get changed, and I checked his bedroom, his bed perfectly made, because he was, in the military. So he always made his bed. And I was like, well, that's weird. He's not, all 3 cars are here, so he should be here. So I went down to the pole barn where he had another car, an older car he's working on. And I thought, well, I'll just see if he's in here tinkering. Sometimes he'll tinker. And I opened up the back of the garage door as a man door. And I didn't hear anything moving. And yet the front of the garage, the big, part of the garage door was open. And I thought that was weird. So I circled around the car and walked towards the front. And when I got to the front of the car, there was my dad laying on the ground. He had used the same gun that my brother had used, which my brother had stole that gun from them to take his life. And that was just, I just broke at that moment, Teresa. I remember just yelling at my dad's lifeless body. Why would you do this to us? How could you do this to us? You know what this does. The pain ripple that comes from here. And I was just so upset with him, and yet still in shock. Because I remember when the sheriff got there and they're trying to calm me down, and I kept saying, just tell me that's not my dad. Can you identify him? And they're like, well, what's he look like? And I'm like, he looks like that guy right there. It's your body, you don't want to accept it. Your mind doesn't want to accept that. So then after my dad passed away, then I don't remember how long it was, maybe a year. We had been in contact, or this man named Dennis, who turned out to be my cousin, had contacted my parents years before this. And so we had a trying to develop a relationship, because he contacted him and said, hey, I think you guys are part of my family, because he was adopted at birth. Well, as things would have it, Teresa, Dennis is actually my aunt that took her life. That's her biological son. Now, she gave him up for adoption at birth, so he never met his mom. But we did, tell him the story about his mom, tried to give him some details, but did tell him about how she had taken her life. And that's why she was no longer, alive. And he had just gone through some issues. I think there was a divorce involved or something like that. And so he took his life. And it was just, that's the 5th one. And such a sad, tragic moment, like all suicides are. They're sad and they're tragic, and they don't have to be that way. And then that's maybe, if anything comes out of this podcast or the video, is that people understand that are hurting. And I've been there too. I've been hurting tremendously. I've been so broken inside and so doubting God, and not understanding, like, how could, if I believe God is omniscient and omnipotent, and I do, how can he allow these things to happen? I wrestled with God when Kyle took his life. I got to this point where I was mad. I was so mad at God, because I was like, God, if you are powerful enough and you're all knowing, then why did you let it happen? You knew the pain that it was going to happen. You knew that my little brother was going to run into addiction, and still to this day, 20 years later, is still struggling and lost in his addiction. God, you knew all these things. How could you allow them to happen if you know this is what it's going to be? And I don't know if I heard God's voice, or it was just, the message was so clear to me, in that he said, Wade, I had to honor my promise of free will. He knew what Kyle was going to do that night. And he knew the impact of Kyle's decision. And yet if he changes it, if he says, I'm going to interfere because I believe it's right, then what other promise does God not going to hold to? And I had this picture in my mind. This is probably just me. But I had this picture of God crying in the moments before Kyle was going to take his life, knowing that how badly my brother hurt, how badly we were going to hurt from that. And I don't know if that's true, if God would cry like that, but I believe God is a compassionate God, and I believe he cares deeply for each one of us. And it probably has a bigger heart for those who struggle tremendously with things that are of this earth.
I totally believe that that was something God allowed you to see, Wade, because even in my own grief and my searches of why, he began to show me his compassion for Andrew in his death. And I don't doubt at all that what you were given there as a comfort to you, to let you know that he wept with all of those issues that you said. He was weeping for you, with you, knowing that he was going to make that decision. I want to clarify for our listeners. So you are one of three boys. Is that correct?
I'm one of three biological boys. So I have a foster brother that's older. And then my dad's first marriage, I have a half sister as well.
So
but there's three boys. Yeah.
Three boys. And then Kyle was your older brother. Is that correct?
Yeah. He was older by about a year and 10 months, something like that.
Okay. So how old were you at the time of his death?
I was 26. So 20 years ago. Yeah. 26. Because I just turned 46 yesterday.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
You were 26 at the time of
That's right.
his death. Can you share with us as a young man how the death of your brother shaped your life?
Well, when you face that kind of pain and agony and brokenness, and you are completely unprepared to deal with it, to be honest, Teresa, I made a lot of mistakes with that pain. I tried to find a pain reliever in a multitude of ways, and none of it ever worked. It usually caused more issues. So I had to struggle through that pain like anybody. Now, I guess one of the bright points in all of that was my mom. We'd been going to Northside Christian Church for, I think, a year or two. I can't remember. I'd been there for a little bit. I invited my parents to come over. I said, you got to check this out. And she looked up grief support, and we found Grief Share at Northside was being facilitated. And my mom was a smart lady. So she's like, we're all going to go to that. And I was like, oh, okay, sure, whatever, we'll go. So we went as a family, although my little brother dropped out after a couple of meetings because, the first couple of meetings you can kind of, play your way through it. But, the third or fourth, it's the real deal. You're there to talk about your pain. You're there to work through your pain. And that's not an easy thing to do for anybody. So we found Grief Share, and that, I believe is part one of saving my life, is finding a community that understands what my loss is about. Even though everybody came from a different walk of life, there's a multitude of types of losses, whether it's loss of a spouse, or loss of a grandparent, loss of a child, loss of a long-term friend. There's Grief Share is a mix of all those things, although there's usually like a similar story. Maybe it's the loss of an infant, or I can't remember if there was another death by suicide in there or not. But
I found some statistics that I wanted to share with you on the CDC website. The National Vital Statistics System for 2020 says that the second leading cause of death in children, Wade, ages 10 to 14, is intentional self-harm and suicide. And then another website that I found, the National Institute of Mental Health, it remains number 2 all the way up to for 15 to 24-year-olds. And then the next segment of 25 to 34-year-olds, all second leading cause of death in that age group is intentional harm. Second only to unintentional injury and accidents, motor vehicle accidents, and that sort of thing. So that was alarming to me, Wade. And, we've recently had a young girl in our community here who has taken her own life. And I feel like the wisdom that you have to share with us. Now, I know you were a believer at the time of Kyle's death.
Yes.
Do you feel like that your relationship with the Lord was strengthened, or do you feel like you wanted to just walk away?
I think most anybody that has a faith, and loses a loved one for whatever reason, whatever cause, has to cross that fork in the road of, do I really believe that God is good and that He is real, or is it all smoke and mirrors and it's not real? Um, and I had to cross that path myself. I think that was really the wrestling match I had with God about, are you real? Are you really powerful? Are you really all knowing? And if you are, why didn't you do something? And that was kind of my crossroads with God was, is it, are you really God? Are you the God that you say you are? Are you that big? And he has certainly shown himself to be that way in more ways than one. Um, through that and through a multitude of other events in my life, whether it's my daughter's adoption, with our infertility. That's a whole nother story. We could do a podcast on that maybe. But we were going to go to a fertility doctor, if I may, real quick. We'd been struggling for a few years, and we had a fertility doctor picked out. We did our first a visit with them, and then we had a plan. And in that week before we were supposed to, I think it was a couple weeks out, but I told Clarissa, I said, all right, we need to take this week to pray. I want to make sure that this is what God wants for us. And in that week, we got a call back from the adoption agency saying, hey, a year ago, you guys came here and said you were interested in adoption. Are you still interested? And I looked at Clarissa and I thought, we're going to cancel the fertility doc, and we're going to go this route. So that was God's plan for sure, and his will. And I'm okay with it.
So you've never feel like, so it seems to me that you continue to seek God, even during your time of uncertainty and not knowing really where God was. Even when you couldn't see him, you continued to seek God out. And have you found him to be faithful through the years?
Oh, without a doubt, Teresa. God is such a provider. He's a father. He's just like me as a father. I desire so much to provide for Eleanor and Wes. I desire to provide for Clarissa as a wife. I see that as, and it's not just a financial provider. It's an emotional provider. It's a support provider. It's a love provider. So I do all these things for my kids, and God does it all for us perfectly. He's never yelled at me once, and I unfortunately have yelled at my kids a few times. Don't ask them, but so yeah, God is truly faithful. What I had to realize, and this was kind of reaffirmed with Mom's battle with cancer that she lost, is these things that happen in this world are because of this world being broken. It was a perfect world. But as we all know, the story in Genesis with Adam and Eve, when Satan entered into the garden and tricked Eve into biting the apple, that's when sin entered this world, and no longer is it perfect. We have an expectation, I believe, because of how we were created. We were created in the image of God, so that we think like this world is going to be perfect. It's going to be love and happiness and joy and contentment. And yet sin has just broken this world. And if ever there's a case for that today, with where our world is today, I don't know what else would be, but that's where cancer comes from. That's where addiction comes from. That's where, abuse comes from, and so many of these other things. And so I have such a hope, Teresa, for heaven, for returning home one day. Not necessarily, I mean, I look forward to seeing Granny and my mom and my dad and Kyle and some of the others that have gone before me. But I look forward to the peace and not feeling the burden and the weight of grief like I felt on this earth. And it just people have said before, well, once a grieving parent, always a grieving parent, or once you lose somebody, you always grieve. Well, if I can clear that up, I don't believe in that. I do believe that grief has a season. It is a amount of time, and we get to choose how much time we spend in grief. Now, does that mean I don't hurt? Because it's been 6 years and 7 years since I lost my mom and dad. It's been 20 years since my brother passed away. Um, and 15 years since my granny passed away. What a beautiful lady she was. Uh, I still miss them. Because I love them so much, there's still a hole that's a void that nothing else will fill in that void. I had hopes that my kids would fill in that void, and they don't fill in that void. They create another place for my love to flow into, and sometimes they're an awesome distraction. But the holidays are still there's still an emptiness because I don't have the traditions that my mom created, where her boys came around the Christmas dinner table or breakfast table, and how we celebrated together. And she was the glue of the family. And um, the family has kind of really fallen apart since my mom passed away, with loss after loss. And my joke is, my family's either died off or ran off, and that's really the truth of it.
Well, it's interesting. It's not interesting. It's amazing to me, Wade, that you are a walking testimony that if anybody could break underneath the weight of their loss, it would be you. You have suffered so much loss and the trauma. I mean, we didn't even talk about the trauma of finding your dad and how you had to work through that. I'm interested in knowing, in addition to grief, survivors of suicide loss can experience physical and mental health symptoms, including an increased risk for suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Can you share with us that what path? I mean, obviously you have taken a path where you have remained healthy. What path have you taken to avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, I can't remember the statistic, but I think it was 75% of people consider suicide after they have a loved one that commits suicide. I know my brother has struggled with that in his addiction. He's considered suicide as a way out. Of course, other people have committed suicide in my family, but it's how did I get through it? It's only by God's grace. Um, I have thought about my own death more than probably all my friends put together or something. Death became real when my brother took his life, because he was 28. He was 28 at the time. I was 26. And it was like, how that's not in the order of what we know life to exist. You think about, Granny was, in her, I don't know how many, late 70s, I think, when she passed away, but she had lived a good life, and you could tell the wear and tear on her body, and she had dementia and her mind was going. My mom was in her early 70s. My dad was in his mid 70s. That's still young, especially the older I get, it looks a whole lot younger. But how did I survive? I think is by God's grace and with community. And I think that's one of the things that Grief Share offers is community. And it's only 13 weeks, so it really it gives you a great foundation to understand what grief is and how to do it in a healthy manner, and gives you a lot of practice in that. But you still have to do more work after you leave those 13 weeks behind. And I have some amazing friends. I have a story, Teresa, where I was for work. I think it was this second Mother's Day, might have been the first Mother's Day after Mom was gone. And I remember being, we had, it was after Dad. So we had to move out of Mom and Dad's house because it was their house and it was part of the estate. So we had to move into a rental at that time. So when was that? I think it was another February. No, it was October. So in October of 2014, we moved into a rental house. Thought we'd be there for hopefully a few months. Well, we were there for a year. And it was just such a struggle because I'd lost Mom the year before, Dad that year, had a baby. Wesley was born July 4th. My dad had taken his life the month, exactly a month before that. And you think, well, a baby's great, yeah, it adds a lot, but it also adds a lot of stress. They don't sleep normally, and all these, you got to feed them and all these other things. So it was a positive stress, but it was still a stress. Work was stress. There's just so many things going on. I didn't feel stable at all at that time of my life. Uh, and I was leaving for work to go to Columbus. I had to go make a big loop through Ohio. And I remember when I was leaving, I just had this feeling of I'm not coming back. And it wasn't a plan of suicide. It wasn't I'm going to do this when I leave. I'm going to be in a hotel by myself, whatever. I just had such overwhelming pain, you know, from multitude of directions. And I just knew that I didn't want to live life like that. And I think that's where a lot of people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, it's not that they don't want to live life. They just don't want to live life like that. And what happens is they get these blinders on of pain, and that's all they see. They don't see tomorrow. They don't see outside of those blinders. I liken it to like a horse race. You know, you see a lot of those horses that have these blinders that kind of cup their peripheral vision. So all they see is straight forward. And I feel like that happens to a lot of people that are contemplating and commit suicide, is that's all they see is their pain. They just get so overly focused and overwhelmed by that pain. And they don't see that there's loved ones that care about them, that there's a child involved, or that there's a spouse, or that, you know, whatever that situation is, it's not forever. It's just for now.
How did you
So
get past that? How did you get past that day when you were leaving and you had that feeling?
Yeah, so I was in the car and I've been driving. It's about a 4-hour drive from here to Columbus, Ohio. And I was just south of Columbus, Ohio. And I just remember being in a lot of pain, and my phone rang, and I looked at the caller ID, and it was Brian Combs, which you know, and he's just a special dude to me. He's his brother committed suicide as well. So we share that bond, and I'd known Brian for, I don't know, 10 years or so at that time. And he called and he said, "Wade, what's wrong? I've learned to listen to the spirit, and your name just came on." And he's like, "I had to call. What's wrong?" And I just started crying. I pulled over. I was on Interstate 71. I pulled over into the emergency lane, and I just started crying. I said, "Brian, I'm just hurting, man." And he prayed over me, and I made the trip all the way back home. You know, did my job, worked. I don't know. I'm sure I wasn't doing good work back then. But I came home to Clarissa and the kids, and just I'd been working with a counselor at that time. I started working with a counselor right after I found my dad, because I knew at that point that was too much, and I knew that this was bigger than I could handle, and I knew that I was so broken when I found him that it was just like, it's not the way it's supposed to go, and I got to have help through this.
I hear so much wisdom. I hear so much wisdom, because this is what I'm hearing. Don't isolate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what would have happened when Brian called, if you didn't pick up the call? What if you would have ignored that? I just hear so much wisdom, Wade, that you continue to reach out. And personally, I understand the feeling of wanting to isolate and wanting to, just crawl in the hole and stay there. But that's exactly what the enemy wants us to do. And it's constant. What I hear you sharing with us is the mental battle, the mental struggle, the constant warfare that's going on in your rational mind, and the one that's going on in your emotional mind. Just the impact, Wade, of just one of those incidences, you know, is monumental. But to have the accumulation of all of that, when you were describing to me being in the rental, it just like that was just like it coming to a head. Like I'm going to break. I can't go much longer. So there's just so much wisdom in your voice to tell people. You've said community several times, you know, not to pull away so far that you are not able to be reachable, because that's the danger zone. I do want to ask you this, Wade, just because I personally have not been affected by suicide death. So I don't understand. I do not understand. So can you talk to us about how death because you've lost your mom, she died with cancer. How is death by suicide different from other deaths? And can you speak to the stigma of suicide? And in your opinion, what can we do personally to change that perception?
Yeah, there's a lot. That's a big question. So I'll start with the beginning of what was the first part of it? I just
How
lost it.
is death by suicide
Yeah,
different from other deaths?
yeah. It's I like that you say different. It's not more. It's not harder. It's not whatever. Grief is grief. Whether you lose your grandma that's 97, or you lose an infant, or you lose a child or a spouse or whatever it is. Everybody has a unique experience with grief. What suicide adds is another layer that just makes it different. And that difference is you have to wrestle with the fact that the person did it themselves. And in most cases, you don't know why. I was talking about you have to put the puzzle together to figure out why. Nobody that I know of, my aunt left some weird letter on the back of a picture, but nobody else left a letter. Dad didn't leave a letter. Kyle didn't leave a letter. My cousin Dennis didn't leave a letter, and I don't know if my grandfather did. But it adds something that's just more complexity to it. How do you go through that grief when it's so unnatural? It's so not. It's so unnecessary for that loss to occur, for that person to make that decision. And so it just adds another layer to try to process than losing a grandparent, or losing a spouse, or somebody with a terminal illness that they battled for multiple years. um, to change the stigma, I wish I had the answer on that. I know for me is to be open and to be real about it, to share my personal experience with it. I was just, for work, I've been down in Nashville quite a bit. And one of the workers there, one of the employees, was telling me about an employee that passed away that's next door, and a lease next door. And there was a post on Facebook that the family didn't share why he passed away, this gentleman that was in his 50s. But they just asked everybody to respect their privacy. We'll come to find out uh, the man had committed suicide, and they didn't want to share. They didn't want to talk about it. And I get it. I understand that. It's embarrassing on some level if you think about it. Um, I never was embarrassed by any of the actions. I never was like when my brother did it, I felt sorry for him. I felt bad that he was in a place where that was his only option, or that he believed that was his only option. So how do we remove the stigma? I don't know. All I know for me is that I'm not going to stop sharing. I also know that this is God's opportunity to repurpose my pain for something for his glory and for his good. And I'm more than willing to be open and transparent about any and all of it, so that it might help somebody else. So that if you have a listener who is struggling with why they want to live anymore through whatever this situation or this season is that they're in, that they can realize that there's hope, that it doesn't have to end now, and that God is bigger, that he will provide if you allow him. I've been through enough seasons of so many different things, and God always holds true. He always answers his prayer. It may not be the exact way I want it or I planned it, but I've also learned that I go down a lot of dead ends that are Wade's perfect plan, and they don't work out. If I just allow him to direct and guide, and just try to fall in pace with him, behind him, then it typically works out really well, and it's a whole lot less painful. But yeah, as far as removing the stigma, um, I don't know. I wish we could. I appreciate the father that wrote the letter. I read most of that the other day, that he was willing to share. And I think the more that we can share, the more that we can open up about this, about suicide, and about why it doesn't work, why it isn't an option. The more we can get there. Now I can say it's not an option for me today. And but I was there. I've contemplated. I've been to the brink of, is this life worth it anymore? I actually injured my back. What was it? A year after my brother passed away, I injured my back. So I was in a tremendous amount of emotional pain, and I was in a tremendous amount of physical pain. At that time, I was really kind of in between jobs. Things weren't going well for me. And I remember thinking, God, if this is all this life has to offer, then I don't want it. And if I would have ended it there, if I would have, if the tape that is Wade's life stops right there, then I don't have a wife, I don't have two kids, I don't have a ministry or a way to touch people's lives, or I'm not giving God the opportunity to repurpose my pain. So I'm grateful that, you know, I had that conversation with God. I had community at the time, but I can remember specifically being at this place of tremendous physical pain and tremendous emotional pain, and going, God, if this is it, I don't want it anymore. And I think that's where people get, is they don't want the pain that's in their life that feels overwhelming, but they forget that there's more to the story, that this is just one page of the whole book of their own life. There's so many more pages.
Two things that I want to draw attention to in something you said. First of all, I want to bring to people's forefront of their mind that Brian Combs, which, you know, he's a wonderful man of God, but he followed the voice of the Spirit. And
Yes.
if you have someone in your life and their name drops in your head, follow through, follow through, you know, because that just might be exactly what that person needed. You had this repetitive player that was going on in your head that day, and Brian broke it. The Holy Spirit used him to break that tape that was running continuously in your head. The other thing that you said that I really, for me, it's profound, Wade, because as I said, I have not been touched personally by suicide. However, you know, Tony and I have participated in a ministry for bereaved parents called While We're Waiting. And I have met many parents now whose child left us by suicide. And every single one of them was in the place exactly, Wade, that you described as the horses with the blinders. And to me, that's profound, that you possess an ability, and it has to be the Holy Spirit to shed light into that for you, because that description of having the blinders on like a horse running, that's exactly where so many end up. And then they're backed up against the wall and they don't see a way out. That's right. And, you know, I truly believe that the enemy convinces them that there is no way out. And it's a lie. It is a lie, straight from the enemy. You mentioned the father's letter of the young girl, and I also read that as well. And I'd like to ask you, Wade, and you know, just because you found your dad, you know, I can't even begin to wrap my mind around that, how you survived it and how you worked through it. But what advice would you give somebody who's living that right now?
Well, the first thing is you can't do it alone. You know, realize that God is with you. You know, his presence is there. It's without a doubt. You know, God promises in the Bible multitude of times. He's like, I am with you always. It doesn't feel like it when you're in the depth of the valley, when the darkness just shrouds around you and you can't see your hand in front of your own face. It doesn't feel like it, but God is there. And I love what a friend of mine told me when I called him after my brother had taken his life. He said, you know, he said the same thing. God's there. There's no doubt about it. But what I'm going to pray, Wade, is that God holds you tighter. He's with you. His arms are already around you. I just want him to squeeze you tighter. And I wrote a poem for my brother's eulogy that is hold me tighter, God. I don't have it memorized, but I've got it hanging upstairs. But yeah, when you experience that depth of pain, you're not alone with God, and you can't be alone. You can't isolate. You talked about that earlier, and I wanted to make sure that we do talk about isolation, because it's a natural feeling. It's a natural emotion to pull back, because when you feel pain, you want to pull back and protect yourself. You want to build a wall so that next time you're not as vulnerable, that you don't feel the same pain that you do right now. But that's not realistic, and it's not right. And I remember I did that after my brother had taken his life. And I remember my mom, the wise lady that she was, confronted me and said, you can't live life that way. You can't live without love. And that's what you're doing, is you're building up walls so that love won't come in. And I think it's instinctual, I think, is what it is. So if you found somebody that you love, or maybe, maybe you saw them pass away in a hospital bed or something like that, you were there for their last moment. It's a different experience that we just don't get that opportunity very often. And I say opportunity to experience a loved one's last breath. That's a whole different deal than finding a loved one. But yeah, I knew at the core of me that I had to have a counselor help me through this process, this walk it through. Grief share is called grief share on purpose. And I say this in all the ones that I've led is, you have the grief. It's your choice to decide if you want to share it. And the share component of grief share is by far the hardest component. They have some awesome videos that they play that usually a meeting starts off with. It's usually about 35-minute video, and they're packed with all kinds of helpful things and stories that you can relate to. But the real work happens when you turn the video off and you turn to people in that circle of chairs and say, all right, we're going to talk about what we saw and what we feel and what we've experienced. And if God has created us to share the burden, to share the load, and we have to do that by getting it out of us. You can't hold it in and not talk about it and think you're going to suppress it so that it dies. One day that pain is going to resurrect. And I've seen it resurrect in other people in very unhealthy ways. Sometimes you call it a panic attack or anxiety attack. Sometimes you call it other things, but that's one of the best yet hardest things to do. And I've talked about it in Grief Share. One of the healthiest things to do for your grief are often the hardest things to do in the grief.
Something you said, Wade, just, it's just resonating just over and over and over in my mind, that you said that you realized that this was bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that men, especially, you just very eloquently earlier described the relationship, not only of our Heavenly Father to us, but our earthly fathers, and the responsibility that you feel to your wife and to your children. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that men carry a different type of burden to seek help?
I don't know if they carry a different type of burden. Maybe that's the right way to put it. I think, in my father's generation, and I saw my father play this out, he was basically had three emotions: anger, happiness, and anger. Those were his three emotions. So, anger covered up a lot of different things, and anger was acceptable. I've had to work hard on breaking that mold that he kind of set me up for. And his dad died when he was 19. His dad was an alcoholic, so what else did he know? That was his truth of how he grew up. But I think more and more, I don't know if we're getting into generations now that are able to talk about it. I think there's a lot of hurdles in the way of people, whether they trust other people to talk about it, or I think it's just instinctual to draw back into ourselves and to kind of build that wall up for protection and safety. But it's not healthy, and it doesn't work that way. So I don't know if men, the majority of the people that come through Grief Share are females. The majority of the men don't come, even if it's a couple that's lost a child. Sometimes the man comes to support his wife, but he won't talk. And I think it's, we're all afraid of losing control in front of other people, whether it's with tears or whatever it is. And so it's hard to express such deep pain without losing control. And women tend to be able to be more okay with that than the men have been. But I've seen a few men get emotional, and my kids were just talking about, like, they haven't seen daddy cry. And I said, yeah, you have. You've seen me cry when I lost my mom and dad. And they were like, well, we haven't seen you cry because of physical pain. I was like, yeah, I don't cry because of physical pain. I've cried way more about emotional pain than I've ever cried about physical pain. And I thought that was just interesting. That happened at the dinner table a couple nights ago.
Interesting. Kids are so observant, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
So you told us, so I want to ask you, so you told us about how you and your family went to Grief Share for the first time. But I also know that you and your mother facilitated Grief Share. So can you tell us how that came to be, how you moved from participant to facilitator?
Yeah, that's a God thing. Like he always does. He plants a seed and then he waits for the opportunity to let that plant really come about. So we joined Grief Share, and I think Gwen Young was her name. I can't remember her maiden name or her married name now. She's actually moved back in town. She's such a beautiful lady. Gifford, there you go, Gwen Gifford. Now, but she was a facilitator, and she was moving out of town after that group was over, after we had finished our group. And she called me up one night and said, Wade, would you consider leading this next Grief Share group? And I said, yep. And she said, well, I want you to pray about it. I said, no, I already know. If you're asking me to do it, then that's what God wants me to do, and I'm going to do it. She's like, okay. And so I led it with Rick Missy. We led a couple of Grief Shares together because he had been in it before me for a group, and we kind of co-led it. And Mom was there, of course, and Dad was. I think the very first group I led, Mom wasn't there because she was trying to give Dad his space so that he might open up and talk more. It didn't really work, but so then Mom and I just kind of made this team, this dynamic duo, because I'm emotionally, I'm built just like my mom. Physically, I'm built like my dad, but emotionally and personality wise, I'm built just like my mom. And she was a teacher. I'm a former teacher. And we just made an awesome pairing together and played off each other well. And I just felt the calling of God leading me to do that, and utilizing some gifts and some learning that I already had. And then I took a step away from it, and Mom kind of led it. And then I came back when she had some battles with cancer. And then after she passed away and Dad passed away, then I felt like the desire to go back to it. And I led it for about, I think I did 9 years stint straight, and then another 3 or 4, I can't remember now, after that. So, and then I was just like, yeah, I think I've done my time at Grief Share. I still, grief always, people that are in grief or have experienced a loss somehow find me still, or I find them still. So I'm more than willing. I had lunch with a friend a couple of weeks ago who his father had passed away about a year ago almost now. And just talking to him and listening to his story and sharing some of my story, because it's important that we listen, but it's also important we share.
Those little ladies, Wade, that was involved in Grief Share when Tony and I were there, they just adore you. And I know you adore them as well. It was a really precious, sweet thing to observe when, when you're where we were at that time, so heavy in grief, you don't always possess the ability to be able to sit back and observe. But I did observe your all's relationship, and I thought that was especially sweet. And the impact that we started out talking about that, the impact that you had on us was significant. I think sometimes we don't realize how the experiences that God has allowed us to go through when we walk with him, when those blinders are on us and we can't see him, he promises, as you've pointed out, that he will never leave us or forsake us. But in those times when you feel so heavy that you can't see him and you wonder if he's there, and you went through that, I went through that. I think that's very normal. I don't feel like we should tell people that that's wrong to feel that way, because for me, that opened up a door for me to know him in a more intimate way that I would have never known had I not sought him through that. But your gift that you gave for others helped so many. I want to end our time together. We've touched on some major heavy things, and I thank you for sharing those intimate moments with us. But I want to end our time together with people, and you've spoke hope through the whole thing. But I want people to have that nudge, that gentle nudge to go, because you described our situation perfectly, actually, for Tony and I, because Our daughter-in-law, she went to Grief Share first, and I tried to go with her. I tried to go, and just to let people know how God works. My daughter-in-law was 28 years old when we lost our son. She wanted to go to Grief Share. Now he died on November 30th, 2018, and there was a class starting in January, and she wanted to go. So, and I'm going to be real honest here, and I felt like I can't let her go by herself. I can't let her go sit in a room full of 60-year-olds, talking about their grief. She's 28 years old. I'm going to have to go and protect her. That was my mindset. And, I got there that night, and I could not hardly make it through the session. I felt like a deer, like I was going to just bolt. I just could not handle it. And I told her that night in the parking lot, I said, honey, I love you, but I can't do this right now. And, I read a statistic that said that it's really good to go within 3 months of your loss. But, this was like a month, a little over a month, and I just couldn't do it. So she said, okay. And she said, I love you. And I'm going back. And Wade, the relationship that developed between her and those women in that group, and I don't know the ages for sure, but none of them were young. All of them had lost. Right. She was a little group that lost spouses, and they took her under their wing and just took care of her. And so, as you mentioned before, Wade's plan, Teresa's plan was I had to take care of my daughter-in-law. No, God had it all along. It wasn't even my time to go. It was, and she still keeps in touch with some of those ladies. So it's that step, Wade. It's that first step. And, Tony wouldn't, he just had his heels dug in. I'm not going. He said to me, why do I want to go and sit in a group of people and hear all of them talk about their loss? He said, there's absolutely nothing that appeals to me about that. Yeah. And, he's a man of God. And I said, Tony, we're going, this is the right thing to do. So I drug him. And, he loved you, Wade. You connected with him on a level that he couldn't wait to come. And that's what I want people to hear out of this tonight. Don't isolate. Take that step, because, and that's what I want to lead into. I want us to talk about the benefits, the strengths of going to a meeting like that. I read this article about group therapy and the effect that it has on people. It makes you aware of the healing process and what's normal and not normal. Those videos are awesome for that. And it makes you aware that there's other people there that has the same emotions. And even though it feels so intimidating, just like Tony felt, that's not what happens, is it, Wade?
No, it always, it cracked me up in a way, in a healthy way. Cause the first night of 13 weeks, the pain is palpable. I mean, it is written on everybody's face. No one is excited about being there. No one wants to be there. They just know that sometimes it's the last line of hope for these people. And you feel their anxiety, you feel their brokenness, you feel their pain. And the reason why I could always do Grief Share and why I did it for 13 years is that I knew what week 13 looks like. And I know that most people don't stay in week 1. Now it's their choice, whether they want to move or not, whether they want to share or not, whether they want to be faithful or committed in their attendance. But most everybody learns how to heal and learns how to grieve in a healthy manner. And that's the beauty of Grief Share in a community. But if you can't do a group, I know that's not for everybody. Some people are more introverted. Some people are just more private and can't share. Well, get with somebody, get with a counselor, get with a therapist. They do it on Zoom these days. You can do it just like we're doing. You get with a friend that loves you dearly, that's willing to walk with you through that. Get with a coach of some sort that can help you through it, because we're not meant to do this life alone, and we're not meant to trudge through the valleys by ourselves. We're meant to be with each other. We're meant to carry each other's burden. And there's so much good that comes out of it. But what I do know is it is unbelievably hard work. And I can't tell you how many people sat in the parking lot on day one, week one of Grief Share and contemplated turning around and leaving. And I don't know how many people did leave. I have no idea. But I know there was countless people who came. And after 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and really after the whole 13, they're like, wait, I didn't want to be here, but I came and I'm so glad I did. And I have yet to hear somebody say, that 13 weeks was a waste of my time. I can't believe I did that. No one has ever said that. And I've done it for 13. I totaled it up one time. It was over 1,000 people that had come through Grief Share while I had led it. Where my mom and I and Dolores Mays, that one of those sweet ladies you were talking about, still have lunch with her from time to time. So yeah, we have to have group. We have to share it. We have to be with others. It's hard. It is some of the hardest work I've ever done is to grieve in a healthy way. My brother's loss, my mom's loss, my dad's loss. I hope I don't have to do any more, really. But yeah, it's that community part, that share part. You have to have them. It's the only way through it. I have not met somebody who buried it and did well with it.
You're an example, Wade, of the scripture that talks about the righteous oak that's planted by the streams of living water, and its roots grow deep, and you grow and you grow. You are an amazing light in the darkness, in this world of so much pain and suffering, and suicide is on the rise. I hope that there are so many that hear your voice of hope, that you can survive. Is there anything else, Wade, that you want to share tonight that the Lord's laid on your heart?
I don't know. I think, I have a lot of experience of after the loss has occurred, after the suicide has been committed. What I would love to have the experience of is before that happens, the Brian Combs call moment where he saved my life and he knows it. And I told him, and I love him forever for it, that he saved my life and he listened to the Spirit. And I appreciate you pointing that out and encouraging people to do that. I think if I could speak to somebody who's just down on their luck, they're struggling right now. It probably feels more than down on their luck. It feels like the pain is overwhelming, the stress is overwhelming, the anxiety. If I could talk to that person, if I could just show them like what next year looks like, what tomorrow looks like, what next month looks like, if I could show them, if I could rip the blinders off and show them that there's so much more to this life than the pain they're focused on. And I don't blame people for focus on the pain. I've been there. I've done it. I get it. But if my story would have ended 15 years ago, or whatever it's been, then I just think about the life. I think about the beauty of my children, the beauty of my marriage, the friendships that I have now, the people that I've been able to touch their lives and to work with, and how God's repurposed my pain for his glory. I would have stolen all of that from those people. I would have stolen all of that. I would have downgraded my legacy and my story of why I'm here if I would have made a permanent decision for a temporary place in life. And so that's what I want to speak to whoever's listening or seeing this. If you're struggling, this isn't the end of the story. This is just a page. There's a bigger chapter, and there's plenty more chapters after this. So it's not worth it. If you reach out, and I know that's hard to reach out. I've been there. I've done it. I've wanted to isolate. I've not wanted to talk to them. I've wanted to be left alone. I wanted to build the walls. But if you reach out, if you do the hardest thing, it's easy to pull the trigger. It's easy to take the pills. It's harder to talk to somebody, to pick up the phone, to trust somebody with your pain, trust somebody with your burden. If you would just do that, it'll make the difference. Your story won't be over. You'll have another chance. You'll see that you'll look back on that. You'll look back on that valley because you'll be climbing up the mountain. You'll have a different perspective, and you'll see that valley wasn't that big of a deal, that there's so much more to life. And that's what I pray. That's what I hope, that someone would hear this and they would just hear the hope that I have. And it's real hope because I've been through that valley and I've been on the other side of the mountain, and I'll probably be through another valley or two before this life's over with. Who knows? But there's so much more to it. And I know that our Father wants us to persevere well in those valleys. And he says, those who persevere will get the crown of life if you love God. It's simple. It's simple, yet it's not, because we live in this broken world.
I think that we get so focused on what is right in front of us. As you've said numerous times tonight, we get so focused on earth that we don't consider that eternity is forever. And the life that we live here is temporary. It doesn't feel temporary when you're in that much pain. I do want to mention to people, we've talked a lot about Grief Share. I want to give the resource, and I'll include it in the show notes. It's the website, Grief Share, one word, griefshare.org. You pop in your zip code and a nearest location will pop up near you. It is a 13-week class. I know that locally here where Wade and I are, there are several churches that offer that class, but it doesn't matter where you are. You can pop that in, the zip code, and it will bring up a Grief Share class near you. I feel like, Wade, the more we talk about suicide, the more it takes away the stigma, the more it takes away the secretness of it. And that's what we've done tonight. I hope and pray that we have shed light in a dark place for so many. And Wade, I'm so grateful and thankful for your time with us tonight. Thank you so very much.
In an awkward way, it's my pleasure. I knew when you reached out, I was like, I knew this is God. This is his movement. This is his desire. It's his plan. And I'm more than willing to be a part of that. So I'm thankful that you're turning your pain, you're repurposing your painful story of a son that died tragically way too early in a plane crash with a beautiful family, and what all that means for a mama left behind. And so I'm grateful, Teresa, that you are carrying this torch of allowing God to repurpose those emotions, those painful memories, into something way bigger than you'll ever realize.
That's the amazing part of it, Wade, is that we never know. We may never know this side of heaven.
That's right.
How many lives that we've saved by sharing our journeys and being honest about the pain and where we've been. It can't be understated. It's such a need for people not to feel alone in their grief and their sorrow, because it's so real. So real.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Wade. And, I'm going to mention this. I haven't spoken to you about this, but I really would like for you and Clarissa to consider being on the podcast, because I remember when we did the Facebook event, Finding Hope and Healing, I remember you and Clarissa discussing, I guess mainly her, discussing the impact of that period in your life that you shared with us that was the heaviest, and how that affected your marriage. And if you guys would just prayerfully consider that, I would love to have you guys back on so that we can share that, because grief and loss can really affect a marriage. Each person deals with their grief in a different way, and it can really drive a wedge in between a husband and a wife. And I'd love for you guys to consider come back and having that talk with me at a later date.
Yes. Yeah. That's just our story. That's what we do, is we just share it and let God, get the glory and do something with it, because it's his anyways.
Yes. To God be the glory. Thank you, Wade.
Not a problem.